Today we're going to be reading a story with your partner called The Drummer Boy of Shiloh. This story is a good example of the departure, which is the part of the hero's journey that you're writing for your narrative. So before we start reading, I want you to just think about this. Just think about what are the 3 steps of the departure. You can look in your notebook if necessary. I want you to stop now and talk to your partner. What are the 3 steps just in the departure, not the 3 main stages, the 3 steps in the departure. All right, so hopefully you had the call to adventure. This is the call to action, either one. This is the part where the future hero is first given notice that his or her life is going to change. So in some way, their life is disrupted. And I'll give you a hint about this story is our main character, the drummer boy, who's going to be our hero. His call to adventure is sort of before the story begins. So we imagine he lived whatever normal life before the story begins. And then his call to adventure was to be the drummer boy in the Civil War. And so we kind of skip that step. It's just kind of implied in this story. Then we have the refusal of the call. So you will see that part in here. Remember, the refusal of the call is either they're refusing or they're hesitating in some way, or they have some self-doubt. They don't feel confident about the adventure. And then finally, the beginning of the adventure, you'll see that in this story also, where the hero is actually pushed to begin the adventure. Remember, sometimes it's somebody who pushes them, who encourages them, sort of like Nala in The Lion King when she comes back to get Simba. So think about that as you're reading this story. How is our main character, Joby, pushed to begin the adventure? Okay, before you start reading, I want you to think about why there might be a drummer boy in the Civil War. So this story takes place during the Civil War. It's called The Drummer Boy of Shiloh, so there's obviously going to be a drummer boy in there. Talk to your partner about why you think there might have been drummer boys in the Civil War. And then fill in the answer together on the Ed puzzle. So in the Civil War, the drummer boys were used to beat out important commands so the soldiers could hear them. Remember, they didn't have the technology then that they do today. So the drum was the best way to get the message across to all the soldiers. The drummer boys were often very young, as you'll see in this story. Joby, our drummer boy, is very young and unarmed. They weren't carrying around rifles with them. They were important because that's how they beat out the commands for the soldiers, but they were in a very dangerous position as they didn't have weapons to defend themselves. All right, you're going to go ahead and start reading. You're going to read out loud with your partner. You guys can choose who's going to read, or you can switch off each paragraph, however you want to do it. Just read paragraphs 1 and 2 first, only paragraphs 1 and 2. As you read, if you look up here, this isn't a super easy story to read. It's going to take a lot of concentration and focus. And something you can do when you're reading something that's difficult is to annotate. So annotating makes sure that you are actually focusing and thinking about what you're reading. So as you're reading these paragraphs and throughout the whole story, you're going to mark, if you're confused about something, put a question mark there. If you can make some sort of connection, like, oh, I saw something like this in a movie, or I remember somebody telling me something like this, or I can connect it to my own life in some way. You'll put an exclamation mark and then a little star if you just have a comment, like an opinion about something, a reaction about something, and then underline or highlight key ideas. And I'll often tell you what we're going to be underlining. So as you read paragraphs 1 and 2 out loud with your partner, you're going to underline, how does the boy feel? And how do we know? So go ahead and read those 2 paragraphs with your partner and then come back. So based on what you underlined, I want you to answer this with your partner and type in your answer. I think the boy feels what? So put an adjective in there. Does he feel happy? Does he feel excited? Because the text says, so what did you underline that made you think that? Go ahead and read paragraphs 3 through 6 with your partner. Again, use these annotation marks to annotate and mark your thinking as you read. And this time you're going to be underlining, where is the boy? So not just the name of the place, but like what's going on there, and underline the details that help you answer. So just paragraphs 3 through 6, you should be reading out loud with your partner. So the boy is where, and again, not just the name of the place, but what's going on there. And I know this because the text says, so what did you underline that makes you think or know that? Okay, go ahead and read paragraphs 7 through 12 out loud with your partner, again, using these annotation marks in the yellow box. And then you're going to be underlining details that help you answer this question. How is the boy different than the soldiers? So as you read paragraphs 7 through 12, make sure you're using these annotation marks and underlining details that help you answer that question. Now go ahead and talk to your partner. Look at what you underlined. The boy is different than the soldiers because the soldier is blank, but he blank. Go ahead and talk to your partner. Type in that answer now. After paragraph 12, I just want you to think about, and I already kind of talked about this, but I want you to think about, what do you think the call to action or the call to adventure is in this story? And it's kind of a trick question, except that I already explained it at the beginning. So how was his life disrupted? So if you were paying attention at the beginning of the video, you already know. Okay, paragraphs 13 through 26, go ahead and read out loud with your partner. Again, using the annotation marks. And then this time you're going to underline the details that help you answer this question. Based on the man's actions and speech, what can you infer about his personality? So you're underlining details that help you figure out what kind of personality this man has who is talking to Joby. Okay, after you have talked about this, how you would fill this in with your partner, and go ahead and type in your answer now. I can infer that the general is, you're going to put an adjective there, because, and then what did the text say that makes you think that? Go ahead and read paragraphs 27 through 31 with your partner, marking as we have been, and you're going to underline details about what we learn about Joby through his dialogue. So what does Joby say that helps us get to know him? And this is important because it's a good example of meaningful dialogue. You'll be required to use dialogue in your story, and you want to think about dialogue that moves the story forward rather than just meaningless dialogue just to have something in there. Okay, go ahead and continue reading paragraphs 32 through 33. Underline or highlight details that create an image in your mind and details that show what the general thinks about the war. So these paragraphs are the general speaking, and he's describing what he is imagining will happen in the war, in this battle. Paragraphs 38 through 47, continue marking the text and underline details that explain why the drummer boy is so important. So here's where the general is giving him some encouragement and describing what the importance is of the drummer boy. Please highlight or underline those details. Paragraphs 48 through 55. So that is until the end. Continue to underline key ideas and use these annotation marks in this yellow box. You need to be annotating with these marks throughout the whole story. Okay, once you and your partner have finished reading the entire story, you're going to go to page 23 in your notebook, and you're going to answer these 4 questions. You do not need to write down the question that's highlighted, but you do need to use the sentence frames to answer the question. Make sure you're answering the questions completely and thoughtfully. And finally, once you have finished answering those questions, you can glue in your copy of the story that you just read on pages 24 and 25 in your notebook. Glue them in flappy style. Make sure that you have annotated throughout the whole story, and make sure your pages don't stick out the edges of your notebook.